We talked just a minute ago about the difference between law and politics. We heard some impassioned political speeches, but also a question that just was asked by my friend from New Jersey. Is there anything in this memo to tell a parent that they're being targeted for harassment and intimidation? I would note that the letter from the school boards cited 20 instances, 15 of which were nonviolent. The letter from the school board described them as domestic terrorism. Within days, the Department of Justice snapped to the commands of the special interest and issued a memo, a directive to the Department of Justice and a directive to the FBI. This is, again, where law matters. The opening sentence describes a disturbing spike in harassment, intimidation, and threats of violence. Now, you spent a long time as a judge when you have 3 things listed. Am I correct that anyone interpreting that, reading it, would conclude that harassment and intimidation are something different than threats of violence, given that you listed each of the 3 out separately? Is that consistent with the canons of construction?
The memorandum is addressed to professional prosecutors.
I asked you a question, not who it was addressed to.
Senator, at least let him respond.
No, not when he answers a non sequitur. If he wants to
respond.
Okay, you're taking my time now. This is not coming out of my time.
Listen,
when I ask a question,
we've given you more time than any other senator.
Mr. Chairman,
now listen,
when I ask
all I'm asking is allow him to respond.
Mr. Chairman, when I ask a question, he can answer the question, but he's proceeding to ask a total non sequitur. I asked about the canons of construction on the board.
Please let him respond.
I'll ask the question again. The opening line of the memo specifies harassment, intimidation, and threats of violence. Is it correct under the ordinary canons of construction that a legal reader would understand that harassment and intimidation means something different from threats of violence? Is that correct?
A legal reader would know Virginia versus Black, the Supreme Court definition of intimidation, and a legal reader would know 18 U.S.C. 2261A, the definition of harassment.
And would a parent?
This was not addressed to parents.
But you know, parents read it. You're the Attorney General of the United States. You said you can't think of anything harassing. You directed the G-men, the FBI, to go after parents. All right, let's move on to a different topic. We've sadly seen that you are willing to use the enforcement power of the Department of Justice to target those who have political views different than you, even if it's a mom at a PTA meeting. Let's try the other side. Are you willing to enforce the law fairly against people who are political allies of the president? At a Senate hearing in May, Dr. Fauci said, quote, "The NIH has not ever and does not now fund gain-of-function research in the Wuhan Institute of Virology." That was under oath, under testimony. On October 20th, the NIH principal deputy director, in writing, directly contradicted it. Those 2 statements cannot be true. As you know, Section 1001 of Title 18 makes it a federal crime to knowingly make false statements to Congress. Is the Department of Justice investigating Dr. Fauci for lying to Congress, and will you appoint a special prosecutor to do so?
I'm going to say again, the memorandum that I issued is not partisan in any way. It has nothing to do with what I agree with or I don't agree with. I don't care whether the threats of violence come from the left or the right.
Could you answer the question I asked?
The second question, we don't comment on criminal investigations or other investigations.
Well, amazingly, when it's the political enemies of the administration, you comment loudly in a memo. Let me ask one other question.
You're not asking.
President Biden recently said in a national town hall that police officers who decline to get vaccinated should be fired. Do you agree with President Biden on that?
I think all police officers, look, I stood on the stage at the mall where the 700 and some police officers died this year were commemorated.
Let me try again. Do you agree with the president? It's a yes or no. You've asked questions as a judge. You know how to get a yes or no. Do you agree with the president? Yes or no?
A large percentage of the law officers who died this year died from COVID-19.
Do you agree with President Biden that police officers who decline to get vaccinated should be fired? Yes or no?
And if they had been vaccinated, they wouldn't have died.
So is that a yes? You do agree with the president?
Police officer.
In Chicago, a third of the police officers did not file their vaccination status. Do you think Chicago should fire a third of its police officers when murder rates and crime rates are skyrocketing?
This is a determination that the city of Chicago will have to make.
So do you agree with the president? The president said yes. Do you agree with him? You are the chief law enforcement officer of the United States. Do you agree with Joe Biden saying fire police officers despite skyrocketing crime rates?
That is a question that is one of state law there and will have to be decided by the state.
You have no view on whether we should fire
Senator,
cops?
your time has expired.
Well, you used 2 minutes.
No, I certainly did not.
Judge, I want to return to our exchange this morning. As I've reflected on it, you made a shocking admission. You issued this memo sicking the feds on parents at school boards on Monday, October 4th. You acknowledged that there was no effort in the Department of Justice, no initiative to draft this memo or create these task forces before Wednesday, September 29th, when the National School Board Association issued that letter. Is that correct?
I don't know. All I know is that the first time I started working on this was after receiving the letter. That's all I.
So from your standpoint, you were not aware of any effort in the Department of Justice before that letter was sent on September 29th. I
think it's fair to say, as you're suggesting, that this letter and what the other public notices of violence against school board members and teachers are what form the basis for this memo. Yes.
This memo is dated October 4th with your signature on it. Did you sign it on October 4th?
I did.
So 4 intervening days, 2 of which were weekend days.
Yes.
I'd say that sets a land speed record for the federal government. Chuck Grassley pointed out that you have not responded to letters of his that have been outstanding for months. How is it the Department of Justice was able to move so rapidly on a single letter from a special interest group that has now repudiated that letter, said it regrets sending the letter, and apologized to its members for sending the letter? How did your department move so fast on this matter?
When an organization that represents thousands of school board members...
I would say they purport to represent thousands because state school boards across the country have been repudiating them and trying to withdraw their membership. That's why the National School Board Association withdrew its own letter. Who brought this to your attention?
May I answer the question?
I'm asking you a question now. Who brought this to your attention?
You asked me a question. May I answer the question? The question is why speed? The answer is when we get reports of violence and threats of violence, we need to act very swiftly. I would have hated it to have gotten this letter and then acts of violence occurred in the interim before we were able to act.
Okay, Judge.
The only act here is assessing the circumstances. That's all there is here, and we can't wait until somebody dies. That's why we did this.
Okay, well, you keep citing media reports. There were 24 incidents in that letter. As you've heard today, almost all of them were nonviolent.
Those are not the media reports I was referring to.
You said earlier it was news reports. Okay, what other reports that you saw about potential violence at school boards were you basing this memo on?
I don't recall them specifically, but I have now again seen since that time people saying that they're repeating what they said before.
But that's all post-talk. It's all after the fact. It doesn't go into your mindset, your frame of mind on October 4th. Who brought this to you? Who brought this memo to you and asked you to sign it?
Nobody brought the memo to me and asked me to sign it.
Someone had to bring it to your attention. Hey, Judge, we're about to sick the feds on parents.
I'm sorry, no one said we're about to sick the feds on
Someone
parents.
brought this.
That's not an accurate description.
Was this an initiative of Lisa Monaco?
This memorandum went through the normal processes within the department, and I worked on it myself. And
someone is a proponent. Someone was a proponent. I bet you didn't write the first draft of this. Where did it come from?
I didn't
come from Lisa Monaco's
draft, but I did work on this memorandum, and it represents my views, and it represents my reading of the materials.
Did it come from Vanita Gupta's office?
I'm not going to discuss...
Was this Matt Clapper's initiative?
I'm not going to discuss the internal workings of the Justice Department here. This memorandum reflects my view, and I stand behind it, and I continue to stand behind it.
Are you aware of conversations between members of your Department of Justice and the White House leading up to that letter from the School Board Association?
There were no conversations with me. I'm sure there were conversations. It's perfectly appropriate when the White House receives a letter calling for law enforcement response across the board, not with respect to a specific case, for the White House to have conversations with the Justice Department.
Are you aware of conversations between your Department of Justice officials and White House officials and the members of the School Board Association all cooperating together, which is why you were able to move in 4 days, Judge? 4 days, 2 of which were weekends.
As I said, I am sure there were conversations with the White House. I have no idea whether there were conversations with the School Board Association.
Well, I bet we're going to find out if there were, and if it doesn't happen now, it'll happen in 15 months when Republicans are in charge.
Well, there's nothing wrong with there being such conversations. Let me be clear again. This is not a request to investigate any particular person or prosecute any particular person. In the same way you ask me to worry about violence in the streets, it's perfectly appropriate for the White House to urge me to worry about violence in the streets. Same way, they're perfectly appropriate for the White House or any other organization to urge me to worry about election threats. There's nothing that I knew about this organization to suggest that it is in any way partisan. It's a National School Board Association. I certainly never, in my mind, viewed that as a partisan organization.
And now that they've repudiated their letter, why won't you just say you made a mistake?
Because they didn't.
Why would you say you made a mistake and you relied on bad information?
Because they didn't repudiate their letter. They repudiated language in the letter which I did not adopt and don't agree with. But their concerns are about safety in the schools and about violence, and this is a core concern of the Justice Department. That's why.